She wasn't begging. She wasn't loitering. She wasn't doing anything, except fighting to stay alive. But to billionaire Thomas Whitaker, none of that mattered. All he saw was an old black woman leaning against his $400,000 Rolls-Royce. And to him, that was enough to explode. She didn't scratch the paint. She didn't dent the hood. She simply leaned on it for one breath, just one. Because her legs were failing. Because her chest was tightening. Because death was already knocking, and she knew it. But he didn't care. Dear viewers, before we dive into this story, kindly do us a favor by subscribing to our YouTube channel, hit the like button and don't forget to comment where you are watching from. He stormed out of the store, designer sunglasses still on, barking commands like she was his employee, or worse, a stray. "Get your filthy hands off my car," he spat. "You people have no respect. You people." Those two words carried generations of hate. She tried to respond, but her voice was barely a whisper. Her body trembled. Her fingers clutched her paper bag of medicine like a lifeline. He didn't see that. Or maybe he just didn't want to. "You're lucky I don't call the cops," he shouted, drawing a small crowd. But before she could say her name, before she could explain, before anyone could stop it, she collapsed. The billionaire stepped back in disgust. She hit the ground like dead weight. Her blood pressure had dropped. Her heart couldn't take the stress. And right there, in the middle of the sidewalk, under the shadow of a luxury machine, she died. No apology. No mercy. No dignity. What Thomas Whitaker didn't know, what none of the bystanders knew, was that this woman had a name. Her name was Clara Adissa. She was 83 years old. A retired civil rights attorney. And once, not so long ago, she fought in courtrooms so people like Thomas could never do what he just did. But that legacy didn't save her. And what he really didn't know? The world was watching. A nearby teenager filmed the whole thing. The clip hit the internet in under an hour. Within a day, millions had seen it. And within a week, the protests began. Thomas tried to bury the footage. Hire lawyers. Buy silence. But this time, money couldn't protect him. Because Clara's story wasn't just a tragic moment. It was a mirror held up to the face of a broken system. And this time, the people refused to look away. It started with a 10-second video. No music. No edits. No fancy captions. Just shaky footage from a teenager's phone, posted with the words. He screamed at her, then she dropped dead. And that was all it took. By midnight, it had 2.6 million views. By morning, it was international news. The billionaire's face, Thomas Whitaker, was everywhere. Not for a business deal. Not for philanthropy. Not for a tech innovation. But for rage. In the video, his voice was unmistakable. Sharp. Loud. Drenched in entitlement. "You people ruin everything. Get off my car." The camera zoomed in just as Clara's knees buckled. Her fragile body crumpled to the sidewalk like paper. Then silence. No rush to help. No remorse. Just the heavy thud of his Italian loafers backing away. The world didn't just see a rich man yelling. They saw a black elder dying while being treated like trash. They saw power with no empathy. They saw racism, raw and unfiltered. And for once, it wasn't buried. It wasn't edited. It was real. That clip was posted on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. It went viral before Thomas's lawyers could even spell defamation. But Thomas tried. Oh, he tried. He released a statement the next day. "I had no idea the woman was unwell. I was reacting to a security concern involving my personal property." This situation is deeply unfortunate. Unfortunate? The internet tore him apart. Activists reposted old interviews where Clara Adissa talked about growing up under Jim Crow laws, about fighting for housing rights in the 1970s, and about mentoring young black lawyers even in retirement. They posted side-by-side images. Clara in court, holding a constitution. Clara collapsed on the ground beside a Rolls-Royce. #Justice for Clara began trending within 24 hours. But Thomas had money. Real money. The kind that silences journalists and buries truth. He called his PR team. Threatened lawsuits. Tried to frame the video as manipulated and taken out of context. It didn't work. Because witnesses started speaking up. One barista from the coffee shop across the street said, "She was just standing there. Looking dizzy. I saw her take her meds. She didn't even touch his car until she started shaking." Another bystander said, "He didn't even flinch when she fell. Just looked down at her like she was a bug." And then came the young man, Dr. Michael Chisholm, a 31-year-old ER physician who had rushed to Clara's side. He stepped forward on national television. "By the time I got to her, her pulse was weak. She went into cardiac arrest within 2 minutes. Stress can kill, especially in elderly patients with a heart condition. And what I witnessed? That wasn't just stress. That was violence, emotional, verbal, and psychological." Boom. The story exploded again. This wasn't just about a billionaire being rude. It was about a system where wealth excuses cruelty. Where black lives are interrupted, disrespected, and discarded. Where the last thing an 83-year-old woman hears is hate. And the worst part? Thomas Whitaker wasn't facing charges. Not yet. Because technically, he didn't touch her. No weapon. No assault. Just words. Loud words. Sharp words. But words can kill too. And people weren't letting it slide. Protests erupted in front of his corporate offices in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and LA. Thousands marched with signs that read, "She deserved dignity. Don't let him buy his way out. Say her name, Clara Adissa." But Thomas? He was still in his mansion, sipping whiskey, surrounded by legal advisors. He thought he could ride it out. He thought time would bury the outrage. But time, for once, was not on his side. Because something was brewing in the streets. Something louder than money. Something more powerful than silence. And soon, it would find its way to a courtroom. Thomas Whitaker had never stood trial for anything in his life. Not when his company was accused of exploiting foreign workers. Not when a former employee sued for racial discrimination and mysteriously withdrew. Not even when footage leaked of him using the N-word at a private party. Money had always kept the wolves away. But this time, the wolves weren't quiet. And they weren't leaving. Public pressure grew louder by the hour. Civil rights organizations demanded a criminal investigation. Medical examiners were pushed to release the autopsy report. And when it came out, confirming Clara Adissa died from a cardiac event triggered by extreme stress, the case cracked wide open. District Attorney Angela Brooks, a black woman with a reputation for taking on powerful men, made the announcement the city was waiting for. "We are opening an investigation into the events leading to the death of Ms. Clara Adissa. If there is a case for criminal negligence, intimidation, or involuntary manslaughter, we will find it." The internet erupted. Thomas was silent. Behind closed doors, his lawyers fought to shut it down. They called it a media circus. They labeled Clara unwell, unstable, even delusional. They claimed the video was emotionally manipulative, not factual. But every time they spoke, another truth surfaced. Photos of Clara receiving human rights awards. Letters she wrote to Congress in the 80s. Testimonies from young attorneys she mentored for free. A city mural of her face appeared overnight, bold, defiant, beautiful, with the words, "She fought for U.S. Now we fight for her." Protests intensified. Outside the courthouse. In front of Whitaker Towers. At every luxury dealership that sold Rolls-Royces. And still, Thomas believed the storm would pass. Until one day, it didn't. A judge announced a grand jury review. And when the jury returned, they delivered something Thomas never expected. An indictment. Not just for verbal assault. Not just for public misconduct. But for criminal negligence resulting in death. He was officially facing trial. Thomas tried to play the victim. He called it a witch hunt. He claimed this was reverse racism and a setup. But no one cared. Not when the courtroom filled with Clara's old students, neighbors, church members, and activists. Not when the doctor who tried to save her testified that no one in his right mind could see that woman and not know she was in distress. And not when the video was played, again, in full silence. This wasn't about a car anymore. It was about dignity. Legacy. Rage that had been silenced for too long. And for the first time in his life, Thomas Whitaker wasn't controlling the narrative. He was sitting at the defendant's table. Face pale. Hands shaking. Watching the world hold a mirror to everything he thought he could hide. The courtroom was packed. Not just with reporters or lawyers, but with faces that had known Clara Adissa before the internet ever did. Students. Past clients. Women she'd marched with in the 60s. Even janitors she used to greet by name at the courthouse decades ago. The judge called the room to order. Thomas Whitaker sat stiffly in his $1,000 suit, trying to look unfazed. But beneath the tailored fabric, his palms sweated. The press called him the untouchable billionaire. But this courtroom? It was no longer his playground. The prosecution opened with a thunderous declaration. This isn't about a man protecting a car. This is about a man who weaponized power, privilege, and prejudice, and triggered the death of a woman whose only crime was being black and vulnerable. Gasps filled the air. Thomas's lawyer objected. Overruled. Then came the witnesses. First was Dr. Chisholm, the ER doctor who had knelt beside Clara as she died. She was already in distress when she leaned on that car, he testified. But the shouting? The intimidation? That pushed her heart into overload. He didn't just yell, he killed her peace, and with it, her final chance to survive. Next came the barista, eyes trembling as she recalled the moment Clara clutched her chest. She was trying to steady herself, not bothering anyone. And he yelled like she had set the car on fire. And then, a final surprise witness. A young woman in a modest dress stepped up to the stand. "My name is Amara Okonkwo," she said. "I'm a public defender today because of one person, Clara Adissa." She paused. The courtroom leaned in. "When I was 15, my brother was arrested for stealing something he didn't take. No one cared. No one listened. Until she walked into the precinct, this little old lady with a cane and a fire in her eyes. She defended him for free. She changed our lives. And now she's gone. Because a man thought his car was more important than her life." Thomas shifted. His eyes dropped. For the first time, he looked small. Outside the courtroom, crowds roared. They held signs with Clara's face, painted in gold. A choir sang softly under a tree nearby, "We shall not be moved." Inside, the judge stared straight at Thomas. "This case," she said, "is not about wealth or race alone. It's about the weight of a moment. And the consequences of believing your status makes you God over another person's breath." Court adjourned for the day. But one thing was now certain. Clara's voice was rising from the grave. And no money in the world could silence her now. By day 5, the defense was desperate. Thomas Whitaker's team had watched the public turn. Every new witness felt like another nail in his reputation. And now, they needed to do what rich men have always done in court. Twist the truth until it favors them. His lead attorney, a slick, sharp man in his 40s, stood and addressed the jury with careful words. What happened was tragic, yes. But not criminal. My client had no way of knowing Ms. Adissa was in distress. He did not touch her. He did not threaten her. He reacted, perhaps harshly, to someone leaning on his property in a tense city full of crime and theft. He paused, letting those last words settle in. Tense city. Crime. Theft. The message wasn't subtle, and it wasn't innocent. They were building a narrative that painted Clara not as a hero, but as a possible threat. As if her age, her weakness, her failing heart, could be blurred by the color of her skin. They brought in their own witnesses, a security expert who claimed billionaires are always targets. A psychologist who insisted Thomas was acting out of instinctive anxiety. And finally, Thomas himself. He took the stand with his rehearsed regret. I didn't know she was ill, he said. I thought she was vandalizing my car. I've been harassed before. Mugged once. I didn't see a frail old woman. I saw danger. It was a performance. Tears balanced carefully in the corner of his eye. He dabbed them on cue. The jury watched. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in. Then came the prosecution's turn. The cross-examination was quiet at first. Calm. Measured. Mr. Whitaker, do you recall the words you used? He hesitated. I might have said, "Get off my car." The prosecutor played the video aloud for the room. You people ruin everything. Get your filthy hands off my car. The jury froze. That's more than get off, wouldn't you say? I was upset, he answered. It was the heat of the moment. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. Were you upset when she collapsed? I was shocked. Shocked enough to call for help? I assumed someone else had already. You assumed. Just like you assumed she was a threat. Just like you assumed her life didn't matter as much as your car's paint job. Silence. Thomas's hands tightened around the edge of the stand. The prosecutor stepped forward one last time. Mr. Whitaker, do you know what Clara Adissa was doing before she leaned on your car? No. She had just picked up her heart medication. She was 5 steps from the pharmacy door. 5 steps from saving her own life. She turned to the jury. He stopped her. Not with a weapon. But with words. With hate. With power misused. And with that, she sat down. No more questions. No more doubt. Outside the courtroom, a single chant grew louder. Say her name. Clara Adissa. The city was on fire, not with flames, but with truth that refused to be ignored. Every night after court adjourned, thousands of people filled the streets. Young. Old. Black. White. United in one voice. Clara deserved better. No more silence. Power doesn't erase guilt. Candlelight vigils were held outside Clara's former law office. Murals of her face covered buildings across the city, wise eyes, silver hair wrapped in a gelly, and the words. She stood for us. Now we stand for her. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution had momentum. Witnesses had been powerful. The cross-examination had exposed Thomas Whitaker's arrogance. The public saw a villain. But the system? It had other plans. Because one morning, just 4 days before closing arguments, news broke. Key evidence had gone missing. The pharmacy surveillance footage, the one that showed Clara clutching her chest moments before leaning on the Rolls-Royce, was lost due to a technical error. No backups. No cloud storage. Gone. The defense pounced on it like vultures. You see? Whitaker's lawyer told the judge. We don't know for sure she was sick before the confrontation. There's no direct proof the incident caused her death. It's all speculation. Whispers filled the room. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Everyone knew what this was, a play. A dirty one. The kind that happens when money speaks louder than justice. Outside, protest leaders addressed the crowd. They're trying to erase the truth. But they forget, we saw it with our own eyes. The prosecution scrambled. They couldn't get the video back. But they had something stronger, the people's voice. The next day, Clara's niece, Ifioma, took the stand. She didn't bring evidence. She brought memory. She was sick. But she was also hopeful. She had just told me she was feeling strong again. She said, I still have one last fight in me, Ife. She never imagined that fight would be for her own life. The jury listened, visibly moved. Thomas sat stiffly, his eyes empty now. His rehearsed charm was gone. He had hoped the missing footage would clear him. But it only made him look guiltier. As court recessed, protesters outside lit candles in a line across the courthouse steps. Each flame for someone who died under the weight of racism. One for Clara. One for the voiceless. One for the next name they refused to add. Inside, the judge made an announcement. This trial will proceed to final arguments tomorrow. The defense had one last shot to spin their lie. But the world was already watching too closely. And something stronger than fear was rising in the courtroom. Justice. The final day arrived, but the city wasn't calm. The courthouse was surrounded. Not by chaos, but by unity. Men and women wore black in honor of Clara. Law students held signs that read, "We are her legacy." Church choirs sang hymns at the steps like a wall of resistance, their voices rising above the courtroom walls. Inside, the air was heavy. The judge looked tired. The prosecution ready. The defense anxious. And Thomas Whitaker? He sat like stone. No blinking. No expression. Just waiting for the world to excuse him one last time. Closing arguments began. The defense stuck to its script. My client was startled. He had no way of knowing the woman was ill. There's no proof he caused her death. We must not let emotion cloud the law. They painted Clara's death as unfortunate. Tragic, even. But not criminal. They tried to hide behind legal technicalities, not compassion, not accountability. Then came the prosecution. It didn't start with facts. It started with Clara's voice, played from an old interview on a courthouse projector. Justice isn't a courtroom. It's a heartbeat. It's whether the world lets a black woman die in silence, or whether someone speaks her name when she's gone. Her voice rang like thunder in that silent room. Every juror turned to watch. Every reporter leaned forward. Then the prosecutor stepped in. You've heard the witnesses. You've seen the footage. But most importantly, you've felt what happened here. She pointed at Thomas. This man did not pull a trigger. He didn't swing a fist. But he weaponized what centuries have handed him, power. And he used it to crush a woman who spent her life lifting others. Then came the twist. Just as court prepared to recess for deliberation, a soft voice called out from the gallery. Your Honor, may I speak? The room turned. It was Clara's old law partner, Judge Eliza Rowe, retired, 72 years old, in a simple gray suit. The judge paused. Nodded slowly. Eliza stepped forward. I'm not here as a witness. I'm here as history. Clara and I spent decades fighting so this very moment could happen, where the law would see us. Not as angry. Not as poor. Not as threats. But as human. She turned to the jury. You don't owe Clara sympathy. You owe her the truth. She died from hate, not from a heart condition. And with that, she stepped down. Tears weren't enough to measure the silence that followed. It wasn't dramatic. It was sacred. The judge finally looked toward the jury box. You may now begin deliberation. As the 12 jurors filed out, the nation held its breath. Outside, the chants quieted. Inside, time slowed. The world was waiting. And Clara Adissa's truth was standing on trial, one last time. The jury was gone for 5 hours. 5 long, silent, soul-churning hours. Outside, protesters waited in prayer circles. News vans lined the streets like shadows. The city stood still, as if the world refused to exhale until Clara Adissa's name was cleared. Inside the courtroom, Thomas Whitaker sat like a statue. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Not his lawyers. Not even the press. His hands fidgeted under the table. The quiet arrogance was gone. In its place, a man unraveling. Then the door opened. 12 jurors filed back into the courtroom, faces unreadable. Everyone stood. Even the judge looked like she hadn't slept. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said. Have you reached a verdict? A middle-aged black woman, the jury foreperson, stood and nodded. We have, Your Honor. The clerk took the slip of paper, unfolded it slowly, and read aloud. On the charge of criminal negligence resulting in death. We, the jury, find the defendant, Thomas Whitaker, guilty. The room exploded in sound, gasps, cries, shouts of, yes, and, justice. One protester outside fainted from emotion. Clara's niece, Ifioma, sobbed into her hands. Dr. Chisholm hugged the prosecutor in silence. Even the judge blinked back tears. But Thomas? He sat frozen, blinking, as if the word guilty was in a language he'd never heard before. For the first time in his privileged life, he couldn't buy the outcome. The judge ordered him into custody immediately, no delay, no bail. As officers led him away, cuffed and humbled, the once untouchable billionaire passed by Clara's mural displayed on a courtroom projector. Her eyes stared straight through him. Days later, the sentence came down, 8 years in prison. Not just for negligence, but for using his power to strip someone else of theirs. It wasn't enough to bring Clara back. But it was enough to send a message. Your money cannot silence the truth anymore. A week after the verdict, the mayor renamed the courthouse plaza the Clara Adissa Justice Square. And in front of it, they unveiled a statue. Not of a woman in chains. Not bowed in suffering. But standing, tall, proud, holding a book of law in one hand and a broken chain in the other. The plaque beneath read. She gave her life speaking for others. So now, we speak for her. On the 1-year anniversary of her death, thousands gathered at the square. Church bells rang. Young attorneys stood on the steps and read her old speeches aloud. Children drew chalk hearts around the base of the statue. And choirs sang her favorite hymn. We shall overcome. And they did. Because Clara Adissa didn't die in vain. She became something more, a spark in a generation that refused to look away. A symbol that dignity has no price tag, and justice has no expiration date. Somewhere, in the heart of the city she once walked through quietly. Her voice still echoed. Not in anger. Not in pain. But in power. Real, lasting power, the kind that can't be cuffed. Can't be buried. And can never, ever be silenced again. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to comment where you are watching from, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories like this.